Go ahead.
So where are they with meeting compact terms? If there's a quantity of water that you're referring to.
Well, the question was, where are they on the Colorado Compact? I assume that but there are compacts on most of the rivers. The Colorado Compact, they're not getting water rights. They're using the water that's been allocated to agriculture and to the cities for the most part. Now, that may start to change here because, if we have another dry year like we did, where the Platte's running at 60% or less, and the Arkansas is down, and the expectation is the Southern Rockies are going to stay that way, things are going to get pretty grim. And I think the farmers they can't bid against these guys. There's no way. But they're not getting any new water. Nobody's talking about new diversions from the Colorado River for fracking. That would create an outrage. And, be the change, us personally, we're opposed to any more trans-basin diversion. We have 7 million acre-feet of water on this side of the mountain, and we need to make do with it. That's a lot. That's enough water for a lot of people. At least 70 million.
Yeah, Phil, you made the comment that they don't need to use water for fracking. What do they use? They use water and chemicals.
There's some companies in British Columbia and one in Route County that's used propane for their fracking fluid. So they're gelling up a propane, think like napalm. It's done by robot for that reason, because it's extremely high fire danger. But it has been successful in British Columbia, and I don't know what happened in test results in Route County.
So is that better than,
It doesn't use water.
No, but that doesn't
Well, kind of one of our logics is they couldn't come close to the cities with that method.
Yeah, see, it has that advantage. I mean, if you use propane, you can't get close to it. You start getting a full sense of what it really amounts to. It's a dangerous enterprise at any level.
It is certainly a dangerous enterprise, and no, that's not directly related. Just last week, we had a death in Craig, Colorado, from a oil and gas field worker who, unfortunately, was trying to use a propane torch to unfreeze a frozen tank, a valve. And even though his tank, as Mark, produced water, it exploded and killed him. And the reason is because the fracking fluids, when they come back, plus other hydrocarbons, can be quite explosive. But there is a method to do it without water. Let's go here.
What about some of the technology we're hearing about to clean fracking water? Siemens and some other companies, and actually smaller producers, are talking about technology that could be used and is being used to clean that water to an acceptable level.
Makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah, there's a few companies out there trying to market that, and then to take the clean water and return it back to the river. This is an industry diving towards the lowest common denominator, towards the bottom. That is, if one company were to do that and it's slightly higher cost, they're not going to move to it. So,
what about requiring companies to clean that water before it can be? I understand there's some of that going on in Wyoming now.
I think it's a fine suggestion. Let's take it to the legislature. Yeah, this industry is making a ton of money. When these Niobrara wells are producing on the average of 100 to 200 barrels a day, multiply that times 360 times 100, and you see that they're able to pay off their $5 million well drilling costs in less than a year, and then the rest is gravy. So whatever environmental mitigation we can think up, I think they can afford. Let's make them afford it, because we shouldn't be the guinea pigs losing all that water. Now, I know there's one experiment on the Upper Platte doing that. I'm not quite sure what the economics are. The industry won't keep reusing because of just the slightest increase in costs. So you reuse and reuse and reuse, it gets brinier. And you need a chemist at the site to make sure your fracking mixtures are perfect. If they use fresh water, then they know that recipe they had before is going to be good with fresh water. So they're following the cheapest way.
I have a little different take than Wes. I don't think they should be using water. It's more valuable than oil and gas. And if there are other mediums that could be used, that's what they should be using. And because there's so much land available and so little of it is in production, and so that there's so much oversupply in gas, I think we should slow them down. They want to sell this gas overseas. And, I mean, that's imbecilic. I mean, it's all there is. I mean, once these hydrocarbons are gone, they're gone forever. So, I think there ought to be more controls over how much they can produce and what they can produce it with. And if they have to produce it with propane, then so be it. Wes gave me some graphs today that I was doing some back-of-the-envelope calculations of how much money they were making on these wells. And one of the big wells up in Wells County is the Jake 2 well. And they had 22 months of production data. And it started out near 1,800 barrels a day. That's a tremendous amount of oil. And then the decline is real steep, and then it kind of levels out, maybe between 100 and 200 barrels a day. But, I did a calculation based on $100 a barrel, which is, it's not that right now, but it has been for some time. And I calculated that in 22 months, their gross would be $37 million. And, I mean, it's $5 million to do a well, but, I mean, can you think of anybody else that gets that kind of return? So if they can't use water, so be it. I mean, there are other materials. It's not our job to find them.
Let's go here. It's going to be a little bit harder to control. Let's go here and then there.
She was, okay, we'll get you next. He was, well, I don't know.
I was much.
I just wanted to know, how much is the state making off of these wells? Is there a percentage, and why is Hickenlooper pushing this down our throats?
He has a degree like Wes in geology.
Exactly. Because we made a lot of beer.
Yeah, right. There are a couple answers to that.
Yeah, there are a couple answers. Let me try a short one. Colorado has a severance tax of 4.7. Your neighbors all have twice that much. Utah has 11%. Wyoming has 9%. So we have a severance tax. So that is, it's a percentage of how much product is sold. But they can offset that severance tax against their local property taxes. So with all these 50,000 wells, the state of Colorado is getting $200 million a year. Not a lot. Not a lot. Why is Hickenlooper doing it? Phil and I got to, we demanded that Hickenlooper open up his meeting that he had with Boulder County commissioners. Because Boulder County, those radicals up there, they want to do something strong. They want some more stringent rules. And Hickenlooper starts out by saying he ran a brewing company and he never had to go to court on a lawsuit. He could always settle. So he wants to settle with Boulder County in Longmont. But when he says he wants to settle, he's saying you cannot deny or make stringent conditions because the companies own their private property rights, their mineral rights. And that is a property right that has to be honored. That's all I can guess from it. Then I know you had your hand up next. It's going to be hard after that. Let's try. Okay, more.
This income. In addition to the severance tax, which is 4.7, and the effective rate is less than 2% because of what they take out of one hand and put in the other. So the effective rate on the oil industry is about 1.9. But there are other incomes. There are royalties. And the state land board, which is what helps finance our schools, gets about 16% in royalties. Landowners get between 16 and 20%. And the federal government, of course, using a figure that was concocted back in 1922, it gets 12%. So can you believe, I mean, these guys are getting $37 million in 22 months on one well, and, we're getting a pittance. But it's really a natural resource. And, as Wes will tell you, most other countries, they take it all because they consider it a natural resource in the public interest. That's all I had to say. But, they get the lion's share, and no question. They take the risk, but as Wes said, there's no risk. Good.
Thank you. On the issue of water, as a concerned citizen, when I hear talk of Siemens is a brilliant company, and I have friends who work in high tech and things like that. But to build a business model on cleaning up a product that you're not given all the information on, that probably won't be a successful business in the beginning. So I don't see near salvation on a brilliant company like Siemens and others seeing a niche market and sniffing the wind, good for them. But I don't see that as any kind of salvation for already destroyed water supplies. And I've read that municipal treatment plants have been asked, and the honest ones say, there's no way we can clean up the chemicals that we know about. So I feel hoping through this process to say, well, we'll let them do it if we check a box that says they have to clean the water. If they agree to do it, I'm not sure it's doable in a time frame that would make it not a problem.
Well said. I just got a little follow-up just to reinforce that. Each day, the chemistry changes. You know, depending on how recently they have fracked or put down a biocide, you know, so it's a constantly changing chemical stream. And they're getting pretty much a free disposal right now by injecting it into a Class 2 well. So this water treatment has to compete with something that's very low cost and not even monitored.
Let me just add, we have to get out of the mindset that we have to protect the oil and gas industry. We have to protect our communities and our natural resources. And if they can't do this without harming us, then they shouldn't do it. That has to be our... any other outcome is ridiculous. It's simply ridiculous. I mean, if they can't use it, for sure, we shouldn't be letting them re-inject it into the ground, for sure. And I don't think they should be using water at all. This poor guy's
Which way? That guy. Yeah.
I think we're all engaged.
Yeah, I hope so.
And we wouldn't be here if we weren't. We're all worried about it. We have a water shortage coming up in Colorado Springs. We're talking about strict water restrictions next summer. We watched our western landscape burn last summer in one of the hottest summers on record. We live by our tourist industry here, and the notion of having air pollution is not part of our local value system at all. And so you think about what we can do. It's just starting.
No, I agree.
What would you suggest that we do? I think there's an energy in this room, and I think the energy is much larger if the community knew what we heard about tonight. To try to do something to at least make it safe or guarantee our security in the future. What would you suggest?
Let me not suggest, but give you a list. You've got to own this, whatever it is. You know, it's got to be your community doing it. But let me just tick off some things. If you were after a cleaner industry, you should get your city council and county commissioners to demand zero air pollution. But you should be mindful what the folks in Longmont did. The city, you know, they had an initiative. They said 60% of us don't want any drilling. So on that point, I think you could get your city council to endorse what Longmont's doing. Just endorse it. There's no risk to the city. Second thing the city could do was join in to amicus, a friend of the court, ruling on that, to say that the city council is behind Longmont's right to decide its own future. Then lastly, you could take on your own ban within the city. There's two versions of that. There's the version that Longmont did where they, you know, base it on an ordinance and they get a citywide vote. Or there's another more stringent, even more difficult path called defending the Colorado Constitution for community rights and saying you trump the state. All those are possible pathways. If you didn't like anyone, let's go retreat back to making it cleaner. Let's go back there. You could certainly demand it be monitored in a way that gives you citizens and you county officials some authority. And one thing that strikes me as a civil servant is this industry is unique. If you run a restaurant, you get regulated by the county and the state. If you run a nuclear plant, you get regulated by the state and the federal government. If you run an oil well, you only get regulated by the state of Colorado. And they won't allow much authority to transfer down to the county and city. They do not allow inspectors to be employed by the county and city. And so far, you may get challenged even on the supposition you're imposing air and water monitoring, because it's going to increase the cost of the company. You've got to figure out your own path among all those ways. Now, of course, Phil would mention, demand that they drill without water, which should be in your purview too.
Right. Let me just say, I want to reemphasize what Wes said, and I put this over the internet over and over and over again, and I sincerely believe it. But what happens in Longmont is important to all of us, extremely important. So you need to support them. I was the most surprised person in the world when that thing carried. But I think one thing that you could demand of your city council, here locally, is to find out what the feelings are of the local population concerning a ban or very strict regulations. And both Wes and I are grassroots people. You know, you should be able to determine what your city looks like. And if you want to have drilling, be my guest. I won't be down soon, but you know, that's the way, you know, that's the way the cookie crumbles, they used to say. So, but if you had good information, I think you have a stronger case to make. And I think it makes a stronger case with Morris, is that your, what? Yeah, John, with those people, and say, well, we don't want this. I mean, how are you going to, in a society that's supposedly democratic, how do you continue to do things that are undemocratic? I mean, that vase has to break one of these days. It's going to contain so much crap that it's just going to explode of its own volition. They have to start paying attention to us. They have to.
Made me think of a follow-up. You know, do you want to become an ozone non-attainment area? Like Denver and Fort Collins? Right now, you're on the cusp. You do not get all the Denver emissions because they don't come over the Monument Divide. And Denver, Fort Collins area get a great deal of their volatile organic compounds coming from oil and gas drilling, because you saw how many wells up there. Well, because you're not in the non-attainment area, a well in rural El Paso County could be drilled with these open pits. That remains to be seen. You should definitely block that. Elbert County is moving to block that, or just this week. Elbert County is insisting that any drilling in its rural community not contain these open mud pits, these waste pits. Another thing you can do is called green completions. Also up there where we have too much ozone, they're requiring green completions. Now these are Band-Aids, you know, these are not solutions, but there's a thing called a green completion. When they frack the well, the cheapest way to get rid of the fluids is to bring it back and put it in that pond and evaporate it. But in the non-attainment area, that's been blocked, and they call it a green completion. The Oil and Gas Commission makes the company bring back the fracking fluids and put it in a tank and either burn them or sell them. So all these are little Band-Aids that can be put on to make it cleaner. But I certainly think we don't have to be the guinea pig and sit there near these contaminating wells. Let's go over this side of the room a second. Back here.
Yes. What do you think about a state constitutional amendment that would give, specifically state that communities have the right to regulate, in addition to the state, add any requirements they so believe is needed?
Yeah, we agree. We think that provision's already in the state constitution. I mean, what you've got are a couple of court cases that don't really deal with the situation at hand. And the oil and gas industry has said, you know, and the state claims that preemption is not, you know, that they're preempted from making their own rules and regulations only on oil and gas. But the case that they point to is the one in Greeley, and that was before horizontal fracking. I mean, these guys can go a couple miles outside your city and still frack. They don't have to come into the city. So I think if you guys will support Longmont, there's some pretty smart lawyers. They're going to be working on these briefs. And, you know, it still has to be cited in a court of law. So, I mean, it's pretty dicey. But I think I think that state constitution already allows this. And I think they've overreached in the first place. I think the court made a mistake, just as it made a mistake in 1979 when it gave all the groundwater to the state. It belongs to you and me. It doesn't belong to the state. And the Supreme Court simply overstepped. It didn't observe the Constitution. And that could happen again. But that's the way it should be done. I mean, we think, Wes thinks, I think, and there are a lot of lawyers I know that thinks these provisions are already in the state constitution. They just have to be enforced, and some of these rulings have to be overturned. But I think we have it. And that's what those charters are all about. That's what home rule is all about.
Let me just follow that up and tell you about the Greeley case. In late 80s, the town of Greeley tried to ban all drilling within the city limits. And it went to the state Supreme Court. The state Supreme Court knows that if you ban all drilling, you're trumping these private property mineral rights, and the state has preempted in this matter. At the time, what the legislature has signed as the duty to the Oil and Gas Commission was just to promote the oil and gas industry. But in 2007, the legislature had the good sense to say, Oil and Gas Commission, you have two jobs. You have to promote it, but you have to protect public health, safety, and welfare. So in working with the attorneys, we think we can make an argument with this new science that the state, in actually regulating the industry, has not protected public health, safety, and welfare. Therefore, it giving a local community the right to do so. So the facts are coming in, and the state is obligated to do both missions. Let's go back here.
I'm going to take a step back. The first thing I'd say, something else that we can all definitely do is just take a little bit of personal responsibility. I mean, everyone here is definitely involved and interested in this, but there are not that many bicycles outside. And I mean, just lower your own need for drill so much. And then the second question I had was just with the wastewater you mentioned of pumping back into the ground. I've read a couple things about them doing it into old fractures and faults already in the geologic setting. And I was wondering if there'd been any records. I mean, I heard rumors that like in the 80s there's a bunch of earthquakes in Denver, and as soon as they stopped pouring that waste into the ground, those stopped. Is that true, and are they finding anything like that nowadays with the waste?
Yeah, certainly on your first point, we're all responsible. Whenever I show up on to sometimes we get challenges. How did you get here? And
Wes drove his bike, but I rode.
I did drive my hybrid car. No doubt, we are the biggest consumers. We're the biggest part of the problem. You got to recognize we're part of that. So make good consumer choices. As far as earthquakes go, in I can't get the date, 68, Rocky Mountain. They were getting rid of toxic chemicals used to make pesticides and nerve gas agents at the Rocky Mountain Arsenal. And they were injecting fluids into the base rock below the Cretaceous, right down where the bedrock is. And it caused a swarm of earthquakes. And once they stopped injecting, the earthquakes stopped. Now we have one incident here in Colorado that the USGS Menlo Park researchers have said was caused by fracking. And it was an earthquake in 2010 near Walsenburg, near Trinidad. So there's some suspicion that these disposal wells here in Colorado have caused earthquakes. We certainly know that's true in Oklahoma and Ohio, where officials there stopped the injection and then the swarm of earthquakes reduced. So it's mostly associated with the disposal, not the producing well.
There's an interesting case that that the situation up in Denver when they were injecting these contaminated fluids down that well, we happened to sit in on a Corps of Engineers explanation of what happened. And I asked them the question, I said, well, how much pressure was used in this injection process? And he said 1,200 PSI. And it happens that in fracking, they use up to 15,000 PSI. But what's most interesting about the case out there is if groundwater does get contaminated, it's very, very, very expensive. At the arsenal, the Corps spends $10 million a year keeping contaminated groundwater from reaching the Platte River. They don't clean it up, they aerate it. so that they can put it back and it can reach the river without meeting the water quality standards. So when groundwater contamination occurs, it is extremely expensive to correct. And that $10 million a year is into infinity as far as the Corps of Engineers is concerned. They'll be doing that. Your tax dollars will be cleaning up that mess out there for as long as I'm going to live, and probably as long as all of us are going to live.
Okay, where should we go? I know you've had one already.
You can have another one, though. It's
I wanted to ask about home rule. What is home rule? I thought we had that, and if we have it, or some cities have it, why couldn't you use that to regulate the oil and gas industry?
Well, I'm not an expert on state constitution, but one of the things that is signal, I think, about our Constitution, it was largely written during the Progressive era. And the people that wrote it were mostly populists, and they didn't like centralized government at all. So they tried as much as possible to bring government as close to the people as they possibly could. That's why they gave the water to the people, and that's why they said home rule is a signal part of our state constitution. Home rule just says that you have the right to set the standards for how you live in your community. Your police powers, you know, what you allow inside your city, size of roads, what they can't be, you know, there is a standard, but you can go above those. In almost every instance. Only in oil and gas are we deprived of the basic rights we have on almost every other situation and consideration. Interesting, isn't it?
Let's go way back.
A quick political clarification. Bill Ritter reformed the COCGC, and I imagine industry couldn't wait for Bill Ritter to get out of office and Hickenlooper to get in to reform it once again. Is that kind of a true big picture of how? No?
Well, Ritter did, we may differ a little. After the legislature said they had to protect public health and safety, there was a focus on changing the rules, a lot for wildlife issues, very little for groundwater. But they did strengthen those rules, and then we don't see much difference between the two governors. The new oil and gas commissioner, if anything, seems less experienced than the previous one. But there's, both parties are into this supporting the, especially domestic oil and gas industry. After all, you know, I have to say this, so many people would consider if Longmont does a ban, it's unpatriotic. You know, you're stopping the drill baby here in the United States. So it's certainly controversial, but I don't see much difference between the two. Lotus?
Yeah, earlier you said in Canada, found in one study that 12% of the well casings failed. That was in new wells. The Graphia says that, that's the professor at Cornell. He says that after 20 years, 60% fail, and that's based on data from Pennsylvania. What does it mean in relation to the groundwater when you have failed casings? Does that automatically suggest that we're opening this up to contaminated groundwater? Or what does that mean when you have a failed casing?
You know, we have so little information to answer that question. This industry is unlike any other. When we have a mistake in this industry, what happens? The state investigates. The state all will check into whether there's been a spill, whether it's caused an adverse effect. But the state does not carry forward and determine the pathway or what failed. And then they turn that information over to the homeowner who's been contaminated, and the homeowner has this Faustian choice ahead of them. If they're going to get any money for that contamination of their property, they often have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So these facts are hidden from us. I would say this, for the most part, two things have to fail. Both the casing and the cement have to fail into a local aquifer. That says they have to fail with this gas pressure below the drinking water source. You can't have a cement failure and it just comes right up to the surface and vents, just becomes a greenhouse gas. You can also have it coming up to the groundwater and causing contamination because it's not coming up that same well, but an unplugged older well. We know this happened many times. A nearby improperly abandoned well. So we don't investigate. You know, I did an article for the New York Times. It never got published, but it went something like this. We have a National Transportation Safety Board, and every time we have an airline accident, you can be pretty sure you get an independent investigation. It's not connected to the pilots' union or the manufacturing. And we use every one of those accidents to prove our flight safety. That's how we get safer air traffic control and safer planes. We don't do anything like that in the oil industry. It's literally buried and out of sight. Their mistakes are gone and paid for, and they go away.
We're in Custer County, which is the rural county, you know, and one of the things we're looking at are 1041 powers. So, and I know other counties have been looking at that. So how effective do you think 1041 powers would be? I don't think they would be very effective, but I'm just curious.
It's worth exploring.
Yeah, it's better you explain it than that.
1041 powers are something that the people of a county can do in an act that in essence protects the county or can protect the county from such of the things that we're talking about, like water and oil and gas and so on. And some of the counties, especially in the western slope, have done that. We have looked at it at Custer County, but everybody thinks, you know, at least the county commissioners think that the regulations we have in our county ordinances, we don't need 1041 powers. But 1041 powers are something that are worth looking at. You know, and you can go and look them up, and some counties have been very successful. You know, and protecting the water. Yeah.
That they can do.
Yeah, and water, and they're trying to apply those. It's almost like an environmental to help save it. It's an excuse, not excuse, a reason to help save the environment, and that's really what you can do as a county. And there's some that have done that, mostly, as you say, on water. But they're trying to look at it in terms of oil and gas as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think that cities really should be looking to their water supply. I think most of you do have some groundwater, but most of your water is a surface supply. You should be protecting those as sole source and making it very difficult for the oil and gas industry to get into those areas. I will tell you that one of the reasons I got into this was a friend of mine in Park County called me and told me that about 80,000 acres of land in Park County had been leased to the oil and gas industry, which happens to be the source water for Denver's water supply. Well, I mean, that was just unbelievable to me. And plus, that area is heavily mineralized, a lot of big, huge uranium deposits. So and I called West, that's how we got into this, was that. And we still haven't stopped that. But for the moment, they've backed off. We raised so much hell about it that they backed off. But the leases are still there. It's still been unitized. But nobody knows how much oil and gas there's there because they don't have to tell us until they start production.
I do know that Boulder County used its 1041 regs in watershed protection, but consider this example and just how innocuous it is relatively. They were concerned about off-road vehicles on the Forest Service, and they got the Forest Service to do some restriction of those private vehicles. I think the biggest issue here would be that state preemption. Let me go back here.
The slides that you showed us, are they online someplace, or could they be?
I can make them available. Laurel, do we want to? Can you post them somewhere, or just see me afterwards and give me a card? I'll give you my card. I'll gladly share them. Let me go way in the back.
There was some talk about, you know, Halliburton making some cocktail of chemicals that was so safe that the executives could go and these trade shows or whatever and drink the fluids. Obviously, A, is that true? And B, is it simply just a matter of them not wanting to do it because of costs? And is that an avenue to pursue of, you know, a Band-Aid for sure, but, you know, a way of getting some of the toxic chemicals out of of the production.
It would, if they can drink them, I say they can use them, right? So, you know, it's certainly an area to pursue, and you'll see it on my slides, to demand benign fluids. Now, it is definitely a Band-Aid, because a lot of the hazardous air pollutants that are coming back are actually in the oil and gas. The benzene, toluene, ethylene, xylenes are in the ground. So even if you use benign fluids, you're still bringing back toxic chemicals. But you have far less chance of having a spill on the surface because you have benign chemicals. Let's go this way.
I heard a bit on NPR that in Pennsylvania, where oil and gas development originated, there of course fracking in that state. And because of the high pressures, when they put this pressure underground, it's escaping their control and it's coming up to the surface via old and abandoned wells. Well, unless I'm sadly mistaken, the hills around Rock Rimmon, west of Colorado Springs, are rife with old abandoned wells. So the moment they start fracking here, we're going to have all this produced water and God knows what else coming out of those wells, those abandoned wells.
Could be. It's an excellent geologic question. It brings a couple of thoughts. Duke University confirmed what you just said about the Pennsylvania wells, and they found some 68% of domestic wells within a kilometer of natural gas wells had thermogenic gas in it, that they were getting contaminated by the industry. 68%. I mean, it was a very high number. And often these pathways are likely to be the unplugged old well, especially if you've done the current well properly, and then if the gases are going to escape up the least resistance. Well, it brings to mind that you want a geologic review of these safety points. And there was a group called the Gunnison Citizens who wanted a geologic review of whether drilling in their community was safe. And listen how this played out. This had to do with Project Rulison, which was a 1960s experiment by DOE to nuclearly frack, to explode the oil and gas and get gas, but all they got was radioactive gas. So as a result, the big cavity that nuclear explosion created and a ring around it was put off limits for drilling. And gradually the companies wanted to come closer and closer and closer. Well, one community wanted to say, we want to put on expert testimony to say that's risky. Supreme Court denied it. Because the rules in this state are the county gets notified and can object, the landowner gets notified and object, but not the neighbor. And really this had enormous pressure. The Oil and Gas Commission certainly didn't want to slow down the 3,000 wells it permits per year by having the right of citizens to bring in expert witnesses. So you can't make your own citizen challenge on that. You'll have to get the county to do it. Lotus.
Yeah, that's a good place for me to ask, do my question, or rhetorical question, another question. The county, after considering some significant regulations, El Paso County, basically opted for almost no regulations. That's an oversimplification, but I think it's fairly accurate. The City Council is basically going down the same route, except that they have some very minor regulations, and they're concerned about the fact that they can drill in residential neighborhoods, and they're struggling with that. The daily newspaper is very pro-oil and gas, and the new owner actually got a lot of his money from being an oil baron.
And trees.
Yeah. So,
He raises costs.
and so you basically have suggested a couple of solutions. One is stricter regulation, which isn't likely to come out of either of these two bodies. Plus, you have tremendous restrictions on what you can do from the state and the feds. So that I'm not so sure that you can really, practically speaking, even if you had aware elected officials that you could do much to regulate. So I'm part of an organization called Colorado Springs Citizens for Community Rights. And we've been focused on a ban for months. And there are two approaches to a ban. One is what Longmont has done, and there are pluses and minuses for that, and I've written a paper on this, comparing that approach with the rights-based ban from CELDEF in Pennsylvania. It's a group of attorneys that have been working on community rights for about 12 years. And so I encourage you to get involved with our group. We're going to be on the phone in conference calls over the next 2 weeks. Several of us with the leadership, or some of the leadership in both the organization that helped Longmont, which is Food and Water Watch, and we're also going to be on the phone with CELDEF. And so we're trying to sort this out and figure out what direction to go, and we're leaning toward the using a different approach now that they're already being tested in court. In Longmont, using a kind of hybrid, try to deal with the regulation approach. Most of us would like to see the rights-based approach tried here in Colorado Springs. If we can get it on the ballot, we don't need the vote of the council. We only need to communicate the kind of information that we've heard tonight to the people of Colorado Springs. Of course, we're up against, there are two major newspapers here, and thank God one of them is much more aware, but the other one is not likely to be of much help. So educating the public is going to be an important task and difficult.
Thanks. Best wishes to you. You know, Longmont Group went through the same struggle as to which ordinance they should put forward, and they were making their own judgment about which one might pass in their community. And the industry spent almost $500,000 and did leaflets, to each voter in the county. So at least Longmont's vote proved that citizens can trump money, even oil money.
I don't know if he's on Facebook or if you have a
Okay.
webpage, how to get in touch with
Go ahead, Lois.
Colorado Springs Citizens for Community Rights. Is that what it's called?
Frackfreesprings.org is our website.
Okay.
Lotus, do you know is there any plan for a democracy school this year?
We've sort of jumped over that.
Oh.
We've been working directly with Ben Price, one of the attorneys.
Okay.
But in order to better educate the community, we've written some things, they've written some things, and if you sign up on the sheet on the table over here, get on our email list, we can send out that kind of information so that you can become more involved. And by the way, CELDEF, it's celdef.org. The website has a lot of information about the rights-based. It can be an ordinance or a charter amendment. We've done the research here. A charter amendment is a lot easier. You need fewer signatures, and the council can't change it. So
I do certainly recommend this group, CELDF.org, CELDF, Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. Some of their history is very relevant. They had some townships in Pennsylvania that were trying to stop big chicken farms, big ag. And they did. The townships stopped the big chicken farm. But then the industry went to the state legislature and got the state legislature to preempt. By virtue of a state-issued permit, a county couldn't ban it. You see the relevance here? Same thing. We've got, the state legislature has said only the Oil and Gas Commission can regulate this industry's counties, and cities aren't allowed to stop it. And that's why what he's suggesting is to go around your elected officials and do it by citizen initiative in a home rule city.
Also, there's one other movie that Josh Fox has done that you didn't mention. It's a shorter one, but it's very good. It's about 18 minutes, and it's called The Sky is Pink. And one of the cities that has done a rights-based ordinance, as opposed to a charter amendment, is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And they interview some of the officials that voted for that. They started out with only 2 votes. Eventually it was unanimous. But they had the advantage of the industry had polluted their river, which they got their water from, so they were pretty pissed off.
But it was relatively a conservative city council that did that. Don't think Boulder or Aspen. Pittsburgh had a relatively conservative political leaders that they felt it was good politics for them to protect their citizens over the rights of these drillers. And Pittsburgh's ban wasn't nominal. It was, you know what I mean by a nominal ban? New Hampshire is banned drilling, but there's no oil. Pittsburgh actually had leases and wells on city property. So it was a significant step by that city council, and they haven't been successfully blocked.
None of the 13 local governments that have done a rights-based banning oil and gas has been sued to date. Not one.
Okay, let me go to somebody who hadn't asked the question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to add on to what Lois was saying. There is a city council election coming up in April, and there's going to be possibly 6 new seats. And I think it's worth a try to get council members to make council candidates to make a commitment on this issue. And you might be surprised that if they hear what we've heard tonight, that some of them may be open to this. And I see one here tonight, and there's I know there's another here earlier. There's a city council member, Jan Martin, here, who voted against weak regulations. And I just think that, you know, it's something we need to add to the mix, but what Lotus is talking about is probably the best solution.
Sure. Let that young kid, he's got a question. I think it's you. You're the last guy. How does that make you feel?
Okay. Well, I got here a little late. I just wondered if you talked about climate much.
You know, I didn't talk about climate much, but let me go brief thing on climate. Climate, I didn't talk about climate too much. If this industry's done well, it still robs us from climate security. So even if we didn't have the nearby health effects from air pollution, the risk to our groundwater, the taking of our water, the taking of our property rights, the lowering of our property values, even if none of those were true, we would still be burning fossil fuels and harming the environment. The point I did cover is that natural gas is equally as bad as coal. And we as citizens can help stop that too. We can demand this industry not leak so damn much. They're leaking 4 to 7% of what they produce. And it's a powerful greenhouse gas, especially in the short term. This is what's so alarming to scientists. We do these things, we calculate how much heat potential each pollutant has over 100 years. And methane compared to CO2 is 25 times worse in a century. But in the first 20 years, methane is 105 times worse. And that is the little narrow window we as a society have before we go into these trigger levels of changing our climate if we haven't already. 2012 was the hottest year in the United States ever. Hotter than 1998, the previous record, and by quite a bit. I'm sure you all felt it. And we don't even put into the news, as the governor of New York did on Hurricane Sandy, that was a climate event. Our politicians don't put into the news that our beetle kill and our drought is because of our climate change. We're missing this valuable lesson. So certainly, the biggest risk to us all is this climate change. Either we end burning or it'll end us. Thank you.